take a moment and just imagine holding a small piece of sun-baked clay. Feel its weight, its texture, elemental.
Yeah, timeless somehow.
Right. Now think about thousands of these scattered across ancient Mesopotamia. Were they just debris or something more?
Something much more, it turns out. Could these unassuming bits of earth actually hold the key to how we first learned to remember, to trade?
Could build societies even.
Yeah.
Even how we started to write things down. It seems almost unbelievable.
It really does. But what's fascinating is that these clay tokens, they represent the earliest accounting system we know of.
Accounting. Not a word you usually associate with, 8,000 BCE.
Exactly. So today, our deep dive takes us back, way back, about 10 millennia, to Mesopotamia, that land between the Tigris and Euphrates.
Our mission then is to follow this thread from these simple clay pieces.
Around 8,000 BCE, yeah. All the way to the beginnings of proto-cuneiform writing, roughly 3,000 BCE. We'll be drawing on the research, looking at how these methods evolved.
Understanding how our ancestors managed information. How these tangible objects connected to abstract thought.
Precisely. It's quite a journey.
10,000 years. It's hard to even wrap your head around that span of time. So what was the trigger? What happened that made people start using these clay bits for counting?
Well, like so many big shifts, it seems tied to the Neolithic Revolution, around 10,000 BCE, maybe a bit earlier in some places.
The move from hunting and gathering to farming.
Right. Settled agriculture, domesticating animals. And the big consequence of that, particularly in Mesopotamia, was surplus. Suddenly, communities could produce more food than they immediately needed, mainly grains like barley.
Surplus. Sounds good, but I guess it brings new challenges.
Oh, absolutely. A huge challenge. We've got this stored grain, maybe quite a lot of it. How do you manage it? How do you allocate it fairly? Who contributed what? Who's owed what?
Your own memory just wouldn't cut it anymore, especially in a larger group.
Exactly. You need something external, a reliable way to store that information. And that's where the pressure for these systems really comes from.
So these little clay objects emerge out of that need to manage abundance, essentially.
It seems so. It might sound like a simple solution, but think of it as the first step, creating a shared memory, something tangible outside the individual brain.
And it wasn't just tokens. You mentioned other things.
Right. We'll look at the clay tokens, of course, but also things called bullae, these clay envelopes, and even the humble tally stick. They were all part of this evolving toolkit.
Tools for data processing, really. Information storage, communication.
You got it. And incredibly, this system, starting so simply, it laid the groundwork for organized economies, for central governance, and eventually for writing itself.
There's something quite profound about that. Earth-bound objects leading to the abstract world of script. Now, a name keeps cropping up here. Denise Schment-Besserat.
Ah, yes. Her work is absolutely foundational. Starting back in the 1970s, she meticulously studied thousands and thousands of these tokens from sites all over the Near East.
What was so revolutionary about her work? People had found these tokens before, presumably.
They had, but they were often dismissed or misinterpreted. Maybe gaming pieces, amulets, who knew? Schment-Besserat's big insight, her thesis, was that these weren't random. They formed a coherent, long-lasting system, an accounting system.
She saw the pattern, the hidden language.
Exactly. Her central argument, which she laid out in books like Before Writing, is that Mesopotamian writing didn't just appear out of nowhere. It evolved directly from millennia of using these clay counters.
Wow, so she traced a direct line.
She did. A really elegant evolutionary line from simple geometric tokens in the early Neolithic.
Like the ones we first mentioned.
Right. Then, as society got more complex, you see complex tokens emerging, and these clay envelopes, the bullae. And finally, the crucial step, impressing signs onto clay tablets. That's proto-cuneiform, the earliest writing.
A continuous development over thousands of years.
Yes. Now, it's important to say, her work, while absolutely groundbreaking, isn't without debate. Scholars continue to discuss nuances, alternative interpretations.
Science marches on.
Naturally. But her core idea, that evolutionary link between the token system and the origins of writing, it's still widely seen as a cornerstone for understanding this whole process.
Okay, so let's zoom in on those earliest tokens. Around 8,000 BCE, where did they first show up and what were they like?
Well, the archaeology points to their appearance right around 8,000 BCE, maybe even a touch earlier at places like Mirabet in Syria.
And this timing coincides with early farming.
Almost perfectly. The emergence of agriculture, especially cereal cultivation, in the Fertile Crescent, it really strengthens that link we talked about, the need to manage surplus. Interestingly, in some places, tokens actually appear before pottery.
Really?
Uh,
That does underscore their importance. What about the material? Clay, you said.
Mostly clay, yes. It was abundant in Mesopotamia, easy to work with. You do find occasional examples in stone or plaster, even bitumen, but clay is the standard.
And there were simple objects.
Very simple. Small, maybe 1 to 3 centimeters across. Just shaped by hand. You can sometimes even see the fingerprints. Then they were sun-dried or maybe fired at a low temperature.
Easy to make then.
Very easy, which probably helped them spread. We find them across a huge area: Iraq, Iran, Syria, Turkey, Jordan, Israel. It suggests a shared way of managing information was developing across these early cultures.
Okay, so these were the basic building blocks. You called them plain tokens. What defined that category from, say, 8,000 down to 3,500 BCE?
Plain tokens are characterized by their simplicity. There was a limited range, maybe about a dozen basic geometric shapes. Things like cones, spheres, discs, both flat and lenticular cylinders, tetrahedrons, ovoids.
Just simple shapes, no fancy markings.
Generally smooth surfaces, maybe an occasional dot or a simple line, but mostly plain. And what's really striking is how stable they were.
Stable, how so?
Well, for over 5,000 years, these basic shapes, their sizes, the material, they hardly changed. Think about that. Pottery styles were changing all the time, other tools evolved, but these tokens stayed remarkably consistent.
That's incredible. It must mean they were working really well for their purpose.
It strongly suggests a stable, widely understood symbolic system, effective for those fundamental needs, likely tracking agricultural staples like grain.
Did the different shapes mean different things? Was it a code?
It seems so. Based on later links to proto-cuneiform signs and where they're found, Shmont-Besserat proposed specific meanings. Cones and spheres, for example, often seem to relate to grain measures, maybe different sizes for different standard amounts.
Like a small cone for a small measure, a sphere for a bigger one.
Possibly, yes. Ovoids are generally thought to represent jars of oil. Cylinders might be individual animals, like sheep or goats. Tetrahedrons, those little pyramid shapes, may be a unit of labor, like a person day of work.
Fascinating. And you mentioned sizes.
Yeah, many shapes come in at least two sizes: small, around 1 centimeter, and large, maybe 3 centimeters. This almost certainly had a quantitative meaning, representing smaller or larger units of whatever the shape stood for.
So clever. It wasn't just counting how many, but also what, all in one little object.
Yeah.
You called this concrete counting before. Can you elaborate on that?
It's a really key concept. Our number system is abstract, right? The number 5 can apply to anything: 5 sheep, 5 days, 5 jars. But the token system didn't work like that. It fused quantity and quality.
Meaning the shape itself told you both things.
Exactly. Each token shape was semantic. It meant both the type of thing, oil, grain, animal, and a specific unit quantity of that thing. There weren't separate tokens just for the numbers themselves.
So 3 jars of oil meant literally having 3 ovoid tokens.
Precisely. A direct one-to-one correspondence. It's a fundamentally different way of thinking about quantity compared to our abstract approach.
And relying on shared shapes, not words, must have been great for trade between different groups.
Absolutely. The meaning was in the physical form, largely independent of spoken language. That would have definitely facilitated communication and exchange across different language or dialect boundaries in the ancient Near East.
It really makes you think about how these physical tools might have actually shaped how people conceptualized numbers.
I think that's a crucial point. They weren't just passive records. These tangible, manipulable objects were external cognitive tools. They allowed people to manage complex quantities before abstract numbers or writing existed.
Handling them, seeing them, arranging them.
It provided a concrete, visual, tactile way to represent and track amounts. It literally helped scaffold early mathematical thinking.
But was it only about accounting? You mentioned scholarly debates. Could they have had other uses?
That's a really important question. While the accounting function seems primary and explains so much, some scholars point out tokens are found in other contexts too: burials, shrines, ceremonial places.
So maybe they were sometimes used as game pieces,
Huh.
or amulets, ritual offerings.
It's possible. So interpreting every token purely as accounting might be too narrow. There's also debate about how strictly they correlate only with agriculture, whether it was truly one unified system everywhere for 5,000 years, and if the path to writing was quite as linear as first proposed.
Suggesting maybe a more complex mix of factors.
Perhaps a more complex interplay of different administrative technologies and cognitive shifts. But despite these ongoing discussions, the core idea remains powerful. Their fundamental role in early accounting and their connection to later writing is undeniable. And that incredible stability for 5 millennia. It speaks volumes about how well they served that core agricultural accounting need, providing a solid base for later innovations.
Okay, so the plain tokens provided this long, stable foundation. But then around 3500 BCE, things start getting more complex. You mentioned bullae and complex tokens. What drove this change?
This period, the late Uruk period, sees a major shift. We're talking the rise of the first real cities, temples becoming major institutions, maybe early state structures, specialized workshops popping up, trade networks expanding significantly.
So society itself was getting more complex.
Much more complex. And that complexity demanded better ways to secure records and track a much wider variety of goods and transactions. That seems to be the driver for both bullae and complex tokens.
Let's tackle the bullae first. What were they exactly? How did they work?
Okay, imagine you have a collection of tokens representing a specific transaction, say, a shipment of grain received. A bulla, emerging around 3500 BCE, was basically a hollow clay ball, maybe golf ball to baseball size.
Like a clay envelope.
Exactly. You'd put the relevant tokens inside this hollow ball while the clay was still wet, then you'd seal it up.
Sealed how?
Often, cylinder seals belonging to the individuals or institutions involved would be rolled over the wet clay. This acted like a signature or a mark of authority, authenticating the transaction.
Ah, so you know who was responsible.
Right, and once the bulla was sealed and dried or fired, the only way to see the tokens inside was to break it open.
Making it tamper-proof, like an ancient receipt or bill of lading.
Precisely. It ensured the integrity of the record. Think of it as an ancient clay safe for tokens.
Makes sense. A clear way to prevent fraud or disputes. Where do we find these bullae?
They're really characteristic of that late Uruk period, found in administrative areas within major urban centers, Uruk itself, Susa over in Iran, sites like Habuba Kabira in Syria. We've found maybe 150 to 200 or so, some still intact with tokens inside.
And they're found alongside seals and early tablets.
Yes, often in context with cylinder seals, sealings, and the very earliest numerical tablets, which reinforces their administrative role. And interestingly, CT scans on some suggest the tokens inside might have been wrapped in cloth or bitumen first, maybe for extra security or just organization.
Okay, so the bulla secures the tokens. But if you have to break it to see what's inside, that seems inconvenient for quick reference.
It absolutely was, and that inconvenience led to the next brilliant innovation. To get around having to break the bulla, people started pressing the tokens into the soft outer surface of the bulla before sealing it.
Creating impressions, like little pictures of the tokens.
Exactly. Negative impressions mirroring the tokens inside. So now you could read the contents, see how many cones, how many spheres were inside without breaking the seal.
Wow. That feels like a huge step. It's almost like writing before writing.
It's considered a monumental conceptual leap, moving from 3D objects, tokens, to 2D graphic marks, the impressions, that represent those objects and their quantities. These impressions effectively became independent signs.
They weren't just about the tokens anymore, they were the signs.
Precisely. Paving the way for abstract representation on a flat surface. It's a crucial bridge towards writing. The bulla system was this amazing intermediate step, solving problems of security and aggregation, but its own limitations pushed innovation forward again.
Leading eventually to getting rid of the tokens inside altogether. But before we get there, you also mentioned complex tokens appearing around the same time.
Yes, complex tokens emerge alongside bullae, also around 3500 BCE, and they really reflect that growing complexity of urban life and the economy.
How were they different from the plain ones?
Much greater variety. Instead of just a dozen or so simple geometric shapes, Schmidt-Besserat identified numerous types, hundreds of subtypes even. New geometric forms appear, but also miniature representations of actual things. Tiny jars, tools, furniture, animals, like trussed ducks.
Wow, like little models?
Kind of. And the other key feature was surface markings. Incised lines, dots, little punched holes, applied pellets of clay. These markings clearly conveyed additional, more specific information about the item.
So the language of the tokens was expanding.
Dramatically. If plain tokens mostly handled agricultural basics, complex tokens reflect the wider urban economy processed goods like bread and beer, oils, textiles, rope, furniture, metal ingots, things made in workshops or traded over longer distances.
They're like tangible proof of that economic expansion.
Exactly. The information system evolved right alongside the economy it was tracking. Now, how they were stored is interesting too. Sometimes inside bullae, yes, but Schmidt-Besserat noted they were often perforated.
Pierced with holes.
Yes, suggesting they might have been strung together, maybe like beads on a string, sometimes secured with a different kind of bulla, a solid, oblong, a lump of clay with seal impressions, acting like a tag or docket.
It's a lot to visualize. If someone wanted to actually see these things, tokens, bullae, where could they look?
Good question. Many major museums with ancient Near East collections have them. The Louvre, British Museum, the Vorderasiatisches in Berlin, Penn Museum, the Met in New York. They all have significant holdings.
Or you could potentially see them in person.
You could. Online databases from these museums can be useful too, though the detail varies. But honestly, the single best online resource is the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative, the CDLI.
CDLI, got it.
It's an incredible project, searchable database with images, information on thousands of cuneiform texts, but also related artifacts like tokens, bullae, early tablets, especially from key sites like Uruk. It's invaluable for really seeing this stuff. And of course, Schmidt-Besserat's books and archaeological reports are full of illustrations.
That's great practical advice. Now, circling back slightly, we mentioned tally sticks earlier. How did they fit into this Mesopotamian picture alongside the tokens?
Right, tally sticks. They're much older, much more universal than tokens. They certainly existed in Mesopotamia, likely predating tokens and coexisting with them for a long time.
Just notches on a stick, basically.
Essentially, yes. Simple memory aids, notches or marks on wood, bone, whatever was handy. Each notch usually meant one, good for keeping running totals, accumulating counts, often grouped in fives, maybe different size notches for different units.
We still kind of do that, don't we? Making 5 marks with a slash through them.
We do. And its incredibly ancient notched bones go back tens of thousands of years. It was used everywhere. Mesopotamia, Egypt, Rome, medieval Europe, China, Africa, the Americas. Even after writing developed, tally sticks often continued in use, especially for people who weren't literate or for specific types of records.
Like the English exchequer you mentioned.
Exactly, the split tally. A stick notched, then split lengthwise. Each party gets half, a tamper-proof record of debt. Ingenious, really. There's even some linguistic hints the Sumerians used wooden tallies, and maybe some early cuneiform number shapes derived from tally conventions.
So both were tools for recording numbers before writing. But what was the key difference compared to tokens in Mesopotamia?
The core difference is information content. Tally sticks record abstract quantity, how many. But they don't inherently say what is being counted. You have to know that from context.
5 notches just means 5.
Right, whereas 5 cone tokens meant 5 small measures of grain. The token shape told you both quantity and quality.
And that difference was crucial for their potential.
It seems so. Tally marks might have influenced how some numbers were drawn later. They couldn't easily evolve into a full writing system representing diverse things. The token system, by linking shape and later its 2D sign to a specific item, provided that conceptual bridge to logograms or pictograms, signs for things or words.
Because they likely existed side by side.
Probably serving different needs. Tallies for simpler counts, personal records, maybe where context was clear. The token system, especially with bullae and complex tokens, was essential for large-scale institutional accounting, managing diverse goods, needing that specificity and verification, different tools for different jobs.
Which brings us right to the edge of literacy. How did this token and bullae system finally make that leap into actual writing? Proto-cuneiform.
It seems to have grown directly out of that practice of impressing tokens onto the outside of bullae. Remember, that was done so you could see the contents without breaking the seal.
The external impressions.
Exactly. At some point, someone must have realized, hey, if the information is on the surface, why do we need the tokens inside anymore?
Made the tokens redundant.
Pretty much. This realization led to the next step. Solid clay tablets, often pillow-shaped or oblong. Instead of tokens inside, they just had the impressed signs on the surface. And we call these numerical tablets or impressed tablets.
And these came after bullae.
They appear around 3500, 3300 BCE, overlapping with, but gradually succeeding the bullae with internal tokens. Initially, these tablets often only had numerical signs quantities without specifying the commodity. Found at Uruk, Susa, widely adopted.
And how were the signs made? Still pressing tokens?
Initially, maybe, but quickly it seems they started using a stylus, a pointed or rounded reed, to imitate the token shapes in the clay. More efficient, more controlled, especially for complex shapes, using a dedicated writing tool, the stylus, that's a key step towards conventional writing.
Okay, so impress signs on flat tablets. How does that become proto-cuneiform?
Proto-cuneiform emerges directly from this, mainly in Uruk, starting around 3350 BCE and developing over the next few centuries. It's the first true writing system.
What defines it as true writing?
It integrated those impressed numerical signs, derived from tokens, with a whole new set of incised signs, signs drawn with the stylus.
What did these new signs represent?
They were largely pictographic at first, simplified pictures of objects, commodities, titles, places, maybe actions. Some are clearly pictures, others were already becoming more abstract or stylized. And the script evolved, becoming more linear over time, using wedge-shaped marks that foreshadow true cuneiform.
And what were they writing about on these earliest tablets? Epic poems?
Not at all. Overwhelmingly, the content is administrative and economic. We have around 6,000 of these tablets known. They're meticulous records from big institutions, mostly temples, tracking grain, beer, oil, textiles, livestock, land, labor rations, basically bookkeeping.
So the very first writing was about accounting.
Pretty much. We do see some lexical lists of signs organized by category, probably for training scribes and maybe some names or titles, but no narratives, no literature, no religious texts beyond recording offerings. Its primary purpose was better bookkeeping, solving the limitations of the physical tokens and bullae.
It's a very practical origin story for such a world-changing invention. And you mentioned this shift also involved a change in thinking about numbers, becoming more abstract.
Yes, that cognitive shift seems intertwined with the technological one. Moving from tokens to proto-cuneiform coincides with, and probably helped develop, abstract number concepts.
How so? How does the writing show that?
Remember concrete counting, number fused with the item, 3 ovoids for 3 jars of oil. In proto-cuneiform, you start seeing a separation, a sign for the number 10 next to a sign for jar of oil, not 10 jar of oil signs.
Ah, separating the how many from the what.
Exactly. That graphic separation is the first real evidence we have for the idea of tenness existing as a concept independent of what's being counted. It's the beginning of abstraction.
Was it a sudden switch to fully abstract numbers?
No, it seems to have been gradual. Scholars like Pierre Damereau pointed out that early proto-cuneiforms still used different numerical systems depending on what was being counted. One system for grain, another for animals, another for time. So vestiges of concrete counting remained.
Context still mattered.
It did. The abstraction was emerging, driven by administrative needs, but wasn't fully generalized yet. Whether writing caused the abstraction or if handling the signs differently fostered new thinking is still debated. But proto-cuneiform is clearly this crucial middle stage.
Showing sophisticated numeracy, but tailored to the specific tasks.
Definitely. Multiple number systems, sexagesimal, base 60, bisexagesimal capacity measures, all reflecting the practical needs of managing diverse goods in a complex economy. Full abstraction took more time.
All this complexity managing tokens, bullae, then learning hundreds of signs must have required specialists, right? The rise of the scribe.
Absolutely essential. You couldn't just have anyone doing this. Record keeping on this scale needed dedicated personnel. These were the first administrators, the first bureaucrats, the scribes.
What did it take to become a scribe?
It was a serious undertaking. Mastery of proto-cuneiform and later cuneiform was intellectually demanding. There were likely formal training centers, maybe within the temples or palaces, the Adaba, the House of Tablets.
What would they learn there?
Hundreds of signs, stylus techniques, mathematics for all the calculations needed, rations, areas, volumes, conversions between measurement systems, copying sign lists, doing exercises. Proficiency in Sumerian was key, even later when Akkadian was spoken more widely.
And their main job was?
Primarily economic and administrative record keeping. Documenting goods coming in and going out, managing inventories, calculating taxes, tracking labor, drafting contracts, keeping archives, applying seals too. Later, their roles expanded into legal, religious, scholarly areas.
So being literate meant power and status.
Definitely. Literacy wasn't common. Scribes were an educated elite, highly regarded. Their skills placed them at the heart of administration, close to the centers of power in the temples and palaces.
And these institutions, temples, cities, states, were the engine driving all this.
They really were. The development of accounting and writing is inseparable from the institutions they served. From the Uruk period, temples were huge economic hubs controlling land, workshops, storage, labor, trade. Later, palaces emerged as parallel centers of power.
Redistribution economies is a term sometimes used.
Yes. The idea is that surplus was collected centrally, taxes, tithes, harvests, and then allocated or redistributed by the institution. Managing that sheer scale required sophisticated tracking.
Which is where tokens, bullae, and tablets came in.
They were the essential tools for the administrators, tracking yield, stored goods, rations for thousands of workers, workshop outputs, trade, debts. The accounting formats themselves reflected what the institutions needed to know.
But they pushed for standardization too.
They had to. Large bureaucracies need standard weights and measures, standard time units like the 30-day administrative month for rations, standard ways of recording things. They developed formal archives for tablets, sometimes with clay labels summarizing a container's contents.
So it's a feedback loop. Institutional complexity demands better tools.
And better tools enable greater institutional complexity. It's this interplay that really drove societal development in Mesopotamia.
It really paints a picture of these systems as more than just counting. They were fundamental infrastructure.
Absolutely. Foundational socioeconomic infrastructure. They enabled the centralized storage that buffered against famine, facilitated trade over vast distances, allowed for taxation to fund public works and elites, helped manage huge labor forces for irrigation and building.
Underpinning specialization of labor, too.
Yes, because if you can reliably track and distribute rations, not everyone needs to farm. You can have specialized craftspeople, administrators, priests, soldiers. Scribes themselves are a prime example of specialized intellectual labor.
And reinforcing social hierarchies.
Inevitably, control over information is power. Mastering these systems concentrated power in the hands of literate elites within those big institutions. It helped define relationships, enforce obligations, legitimize authority. It was crucial for state formation. Without this information infrastructure, the scale of Mesopotamian urban civilization is hard to imagine.
It's fascinating to compare this Mesopotamian path with how other ancient cultures tackled similar problems. You mentioned the Incan khipu.
Right, the khipu. A completely different approach, using knotted cords, cotton, or camelid fibers, information encoded in knot type, position on the cord using a base 10 system, cord color, even the ply and spin direction.
Knots holding in numbers.
Primarily numerical data, yes. The quipukameox, trained officials, use them for census data, tracking tribute, state inventories, military logistics. It was a sophisticated administrative tool for the vast Inca Empire, relying on textile technology.
So similar administrative needs, but a totally different material solution.
Exactly. No clay, no graphic signs in the same way. It was a 3D, tactile system based on knots and fibers, potentially incorporating color coding centrally, which Mesopotamian systems didn't really do. Both needed specialists, but reading knots versus reading signs is fundamentally different.
And the Chinese oracle bones, another contrast.
Or a very different trajectory again. This is the earliest confirmed Chinese writing, late Shang dynasty, characters inscribed on turtle shells and ox bones.
So not primarily for accounting.
No, the vast majority are records of royal divination. Kings asking questions to ancestors about weather, harvest, battles, rituals. Heat was applied, cracks interpreted, and often the question, prediction, and outcome were inscribed. It was about communicating with the divine and recording state concerns for the elite.
So writing emerges from religion and politics there, not economics.
Primarily, yes, based on the earliest preserved evidence. Economic records might have existed on perishable materials like bamboo, but the first substantial writing we have is divinatory, and it's a logographic script carved on bone, visually very different from impressed clay. While China certainly had tallying methods, that specific Mesopotamian pathway tokens, bullae, and pressed signs seems unique.
It really highlights that there wasn't one single path to complex information management.
Not at all. The challenge was universal recording things beyond memory. But the solutions were deeply embedded in local culture, materials, history. Mesopotamia's economic needs drove its path through clay. The Inca leveraged their textile traditions. Shang China's writing centered initially on elite ritual. It shows the incredible diversity of human ingenuity.
So wrapping this all up, what's the core journey we've traced here?
It's that remarkable evolution from tangible, concrete counting using simple clay tokens through the crucial intermediate technology of bullae, which introduced security and the idea of surface representation, leading ultimately to the abstract signs of proto-cuneiform writing on clay tablets.
A journey driven by the practical needs of managing resources in an increasingly complex society.
Exactly. And the principles established back then, recording transactions, tracking inventory, verifying information, they're still fundamental to accounting and information management today. These systems were essential for building cities, states, complex economies.
And profoundly connected to deeper shifts in human thought.
Definitely. Linked to the origins of abstract thinking, mathematics, literacy itself, the impact was immense. And seeing the different paths taken by cultures like the Inca or Shang just emphasizes how varied the routes to managing information can be.
It leaves you wondering, doesn't it? As we interact with our own complex digital systems, these sleek interfaces and invisible data streams, could there be echoes of those ancient clay tokens hidden within them? Perhaps the way we physically or even virtually manipulate information still shapes how we understand it in ways we don't always recognize.
That's a fascinating thought to end on. How these humble ancient tools, born from mud and necessity, might still in some way be whispering their influence into our world today. A reminder that even our most abstract concepts often have very tangible beginnings.